So how many people have died from COVID? CDC still doesn't know, and we're 2 years into this pandemic. What we've covered a similar story like this before, trying to figure out how they figure out how many people died from COVID or died with COVID. We've showed you that stuff. And so Brett Baer, he's the serious straight news guy over at Fox News. He's the guy who looks like he should be playing middle linebacker, but I'm doing the news. That's right. My neck is as big as your thigh. I'm doing the news. I'm Brett Baer. I'm super serious too. I don't mess around with opinions. Opinions are for cowards. I deal in facts. That's Brett Baer. And I like a guy who gives me the news with a pocket square. Right? Yeah. You don't want to go full. You don't want to go ascot, but you want to dress it up a little. So he goes pocket square, which I appreciate.
I like a pocket square and a guy with a thumb-shaped head with a great head of hair, and that's all.
You know, I actually do. I make fun, but I do like pocket squares.
I do too. Nice really pocket square.
I was just jealous of his pocket square,
and I'm jealous of his football physique. See, this is all about. That's what comedy's about: turning jealousy into poking fun at someone else. That's really what it is.
I have pocket square envy.
I do too. It looks good. I can't get over how good it looks. Anyway, I actually bought a pocket square. Anyway, I can't get it to look like that, so I don't wear it. And a square looks. I gotta stop talking about this. All right, let's move on. Let's move on because I can talk about this for another 20 minutes. Honestly, so they asked this is the CDC head of the CDC, and every time I see her, she is bullshitting like a used car salesperson. Whether she's testifying in front of Congress or whether she's being interviewed, she's a bullshitter. And these are the people that YouTube say I can't contradict. Well, here Brett Baer tries to find out how many people are dying from COVID. And watch what she says.
Do you know how many of the 836,000 deaths in the U.S. linked to COVID are from COVID, or how many are with COVID, but they had other comorbidities? Do you have that breakdown?
Yes, of course. With Omicron, we're following that very carefully. Our death registry, of course, takes a few weeks to collect. And of course, Omicron has just been with us for a few weeks, but those data will be forthcoming.
Do you know how many of the 836,000 deaths in?
Now that's a lot of deaths. Why? Because they always quote that. You don't care. You don't. Because, like, I'll tell people we should keep schools open and we shouldn't be that afraid of COVID. And there's early treatments that have been suppressed. And make sure you get your vitamin D3 up. And we got to get back to living our normal lives again and not live in fear of this thing and lockdowns. And they go, 800,000 people are dead. I'm like, well, how many of those people really died from COVID? And that's what we're trying to find out. Because we've all seen the news reports where people get shot and they have COVID and they're listed as a COVID death. We've seen that. So he's going to ask the question and watch how she bullshits. Watch. She's not answering the question accidentally. She's on purpose trying to obfuscate and hope you don't notice.
U.S. linked to COVID are from COVID, or how many are with COVID, but they had other comorbidities? Do you have that breakdown?
Yes, of course. With Omicron, we're following that.
Yeah, no. Yes, you do have that? Well, what would that be? Let me just talk about Omicron. We don't have it, and I'm going to be an embarrassment to everything in the world.
She said, yes, of course, we don't have those numbers.
Oh, yes, of course. No. Here we go.
Have that breakdown?
Yes, of course. With Omicron, we're following that very carefully. Our death registry, of course, takes a few weeks to collect. And of course, Omicron has just been with us for a few weeks, but those data will be forthcoming.
Yeah.
Do you know how many?
You
of the
know
800...
exactly what the F he asked you, and you know she knows exactly that she's not answering. And hey, come on, it's the CDC, though. It's not like he's asking how many Iraqis and Afghans we collaterally murdered in a 20-year war that wasted trillions of dollars. I mean, come on. This is important.
Do you think she does know the answer and just can't say, like the FBI?
I think whatever the answer is, it's not good for her, and so that's why she obfuscated.
They must have some idea what the number is.
Whatever it is, it undermines their narrative, and so that's why she did that.
It's not a scary number.
Maybe it's not scary.
Does she not watch CNN? The number's up to 1 that turned out to not be
from
real.
almost, yeah.
Right.
But he's asking the overall number. She's pretending like he's asking just about Omicron. By the way, Omicron, when they reported their first Omicron death, that was completely made up. So I don't know. Can you Google stuff? See if anyone if they admit or if they're claiming anyone died from Omicron instead of with Omicron.
Who's that person just died? Ernby in LA here, and she died of COVID recently. She was like 40 or something, but they kept saying, she was against vaccine mandates, and then she died of COVID. Ha ha. That was on the LA Times. Like, yes, we must laugh at their deaths. I'm curious to know if because I didn't see Omicron in any of those articles. There's got to be more to that story.
So let me play it one more time.
Do you know how many of the 836,000?
How many of the 836,000 deaths? He means from the start of the pandemic. She pretends he asked, how many people died from Omicron? Why would she do that? And doesn't that make you suspicious? It makes me, as the kids say today, super sus.
Deaths in the U.S. linked to COVID are from COVID, or how many are with COVID, but they had other comorbidities? Do you have that breakdown?
Yes, of course. With Omicron, we're following that very carefully. Our death registry, of course, takes a few weeks to collect. And of course, Omicron has just been with us for a few weeks. But
yeah, okay. So what this guy says, it seems like this would be good to know by now, as wildly consequential moves about school closures, lockdowns, and vax mandates are relying on that kind of information. How can we make any of these decisions if we don't know what the real death rate is from COVID? That's a great point, whoever that guy is. Now even a blockhead like Jake Tapper, who is a blockhead, is and a willing tool of the corporation, which is why he has that job. He's even getting suspicious. Watch this.
The hospitals are still stretched thin because of this, so I'm not trying to take away from that. But
by the way, they're not. The hospitals are not stretched thin because of COVID. The hospitals are stretched thin because ICU beds are in short supply all the time because they're not profitable, and we run our healthcare system based on what's profitable, not based on need. So you think 2 years into a pandemic, we would have added some more ICU capacity? We have not. And I showed you that in 2018, which was a year before the pandemic started, the goddamn hospitals were overrun with people with the regular flu, and they had to treat them in tents outside of hospitals from coast to coast. Nobody remembers this.
Did they at least put up COVID tents? Can we at least get the tents for the hospitals?
Right? So he just repeats a bullshit line because Jake Tapper knows less than a pothead YouTube host.
the hospitals are still stretched thin because of this, so I'm not trying to take away from that. But if 40% in some hospitals, 40% of the people who have COVID don't necessarily have problematic COVID. They're there because they got in a car accident. They're there because you know, they bumped their head, and they're being included as in the hospital with COVID. That number seems kind of misleading.
Yeah, I agree, Jake. It surprises me that they have not been able to parse out that data more carefully. I think the data that Dr. Walensky is quoting is from New York State, and we've been following that data as well. And I can show you what we've seen, sort of tracks with what she said. But out of all the patients that are in the hospital, about 57%, these are COVID patients, admitted because of or complications from COVID, 43% admitted for other reasons and then diagnosed with COVID. I think, there needs to be transparency about that in terms of for or with COVID. The only thing I will tell you, Jake, again, working in the hospital, is that at the time someone is then diagnosed with COVID, even if they didn't come in for that reason, it does take up a lot of resources then in terms of infection protocols, personal protective equipment, more testing, all that kind of stuff. So even though that may not have been the initial impetus to bring him in the hospital, it just requires a lot of energy and resources on behalf of the hospital staff. And
So that's Sanjay Gupta still trying to find a way to pull a big pharma talking point out of his ass in the middle of this answer. He did it. He did it right at the end. Yeah, it's still fucked up, though, man. Still totally big pharma narrative, right? Okay? All right, I'm good because I'm still catching shit. They canceled my next book already because of what I said on Joe Rogan, all right? So I got caught telling the truth about ivermectin, and I'm never going to I'm never going to forget that. So I'm always
that ivermectin.
Go ahead.
That stuff's only good for horses and convicts.
So remember we tried to figure out what this meant before on the show. And there's an article in Political from a while ago. It says the phrase died of COVID complications means a variety of different things with no definition. States are, which is hilarious. So what they're saying is the phrase died of complications from COVID actually means nothing. It has a variety of different things with no definition. You could just say nothing. It means nothing. So states or even individual hospitals have their own criteria for how to count deaths from COVID. Everybody has their own way.
Science.
Science. Science. Here's. Remember, this is the director of the Illinois Department of Public Health. Here's how she counts a COVID death. You ready? Here we go.
Just want to be clear in terms of the definition of people dying of COVID. So the case definition is very simplistic. It means at the time of death, it was a COVID positive diagnosis. So that means that if you were in hospice and had already been given, a few weeks to live, and then you also were found to have COVID, that would be counted as a COVID death. It means that even if you died of a clear alternate cause, but you had COVID at the same time, it's still listed as a COVID death. So everyone who's listed as a COVID death doesn't mean that was the cause of the death, but they had COVID at the time of death. I hope that's helpful.
And then she got wow. And you see how fast she got out of there?
Look at that.
They should have did this at the end of it. Watch this. That's what they should have put.
Can you play her walking away while you do it?
I can't do it. I wish I could. So I just want to remind people, according to Gallup, they did the calculations, and they calculated that the hospitalization rate for people who are vaccinated, the hospitalization rate was 0.01%, or 1 in 10,914 people who got COVID would end up having to go to a hospital, not an ICU, just a hospital. So, and then the rate for the unvaccinated was 1 in 0.89%. Now, both of those are under 1%, as you can see.
Wow.
That means 1 in 112 people had to go to the hospital who were not vaccinated. That was 0.89%. Now, that's according to Gallup, because you can't get real figures on this shit, but they put their noggin into it, and that's what they came up with. I've heard people say between 1 and 5% of the unvaccinated have to go to the hospital. I don't know where they're getting that from, but this is what Gallup says. And so now some people would look at this. So just so you know, and then here's what they say about the death rate. This was from March of 2020. So this is before anybody knew anything. They go, it's 3.4% of death. But and I still hear people quote this number, and this number is from fucking 2020. So watch this. Here we go. Here's one more of the CDC.
Responsibility as a CDC director to correct it.
So, like, remember when Sonia Sotomayor, the Supreme Court justice, gave wildly inaccurate misinformation about COVID?
She even rounded up the misinformation numbers.
Yes.
Like,
way worse than anything Joe Rogan has ever done. And nobody flipped out about her. Nobody said we need a fact checker on the Supreme Court. Nobody said. So this guy, Brett Baer, Mr. Strongjaw, says he asked her the right question.
Responsibility as a CDC director to correct a very big mischaracterization by one of the Supreme Court justices.
Yeah, here's what I'll tell you. I'll tell you that right now, if you're unvaccinated, you're 17 times more likely to be in the hospital and 20 times more likely to die than if you're boosted.
Whoa, that's a load of horse dewormer, lady.
So those there's three kind of lies, right? There's lies, there's damn lies, and then there's statistics. Okay? So now her statistics might be correct, but she's using them in a very dishonest way. What do you mean, Jimmy? Well, I'll show you. Because I found this out when I posted it on Twitter. I posted this exact thing on Twitter, and I said, just so everybody knows what the hospitalization rate is for the vaxxed and the unvaxxed. It's under 1% for both. That was my tweet. And then lots of people came back and said, you don't know how statistics work. That means that an unvaccinated person has an 89 times greater chance of being hospitalized than a vaccinated person. And I'm like,
somebody said that to you?
Yes. But that is what that means. So 0.89% is 89 times greater than 0.01%. That is true. Both under 1%.
Right.
So you can look at it like that in the most inflammatory statistic in the world, or you could look at it like that. Oh, it's still both of them under 1%.
Well, but Jimmy, you're quoting a poll from Gallup, and that's the thing horses do. We already know you love the dewormer.
So when she says this, watch this.
Responsibility as a CDC director to correct a very big mischaracterization by one of the Supreme Court
So when
justices.
she says this.
Yeah, here's what I'll tell you. I'll tell you that right now, if you're unvaccinated, you're 17 times more likely to be in the hospital and 20 times more likely.
So now what is that? Again, she's using that 20 times. She's not using the people who are vaccinated versus percentage and the people who are unvaccinated percentage. She's using the 20 times thing. She's using the most inflammatory language possible, the most scary way to present a statistic in the world possible. That's what she's doing right there. So her numbers might be correct, but it's the equivalent of saying you have an 89 times greater chance. Do you see how people are using statistics to keep the American people constantly shitting their pants? Constantly getting a skewed view of how to treat COVID. And the people who are the loudest screamers about vaccines have no idea that early treatments have been completely suppressed. They don't know if they've been propagandized. That's when you know propaganda is working, when you get people to repeat it for free. And they don't even know they're repeating propaganda. Just like when people would say, you get the vaccine, you're not going to get it. You get the vaccine, you won't get good. Propaganda. You get the vaccine, you can't give it to somebody. Propaganda. So.
Wow, Jimmy, I'm starting to regret my Pfizer tattoo.
So just to recap, apparently they don't have any of the relevant numbers on anything they've based their COVID policy on for the last 2 frickin' years.
Holy shit.
Think of there's a statistic for you. There's a way to look at a stat that should piss you off. So they just pulled those stats out of they just pulled these COVID policies out of their ass, but it's Joe Rogan's fault that people don't trust the establishment media. And it's also my fault. It's also my fault, too. They're very powerful. Okay, there you go. More bullshit and non-answers and propagandizing from the CDC. We added a second show, January 26th in Raleigh, and we're going to be in Philadelphia on February 20th. Go to jimmydorcomedy.com for a link for all our tickets. And while you're there, become a premium member. Get access to all our premium videos.